Hey Matt, welcome back to the show.
Hey, how's it going? Busy week,
Yeah,
hasn't it been?
yeah, it's been a busy week. Plenty of interesting things going on. I know that one of my neighbours is certainly busy. I can hear maybe there's a little bobcat or something driving around there, but hopefully it won't interfere too much with the show today.
Yeah,
But
that's right. And we had a ton on CDK last week. We were running a whole bunch of workshops with different customers, which is quite cool. And I guess this week as well, we've got quite a lot to show off in future episodes. We're building another quick game, so we'll be able to show. It's a JavaScript based game, so we'll be able to show that off at some point as well. But we've also got a special guest, right?
yeah, we got a special guest today. So Sumit will be joining us in just a few minutes. So I know that he's just finishing up the previous engagement that he was working with. So today should be an episode. Once we go over, what's new and what's been coming up during the weeks. Sumit will be coming on and talking to us about identity and especially Cognito. So Sumit's an expert in that area. And we'll do his introduction once he pops on in the next few minutes or so. But I know a couple of episodes ago, and consistently we've come back and we thought about, looked at like Chalice, what we've done with that. So there's a couple of extra videos that we've done and uploaded, impromptu videos on YouTube that go through how you would assign a custom domain name and create the certificates and all the extra bits and pieces to stitch that together. So if people are interested there, definitely go ahead and look at our YouTube channel. You'll be able to see those updates. We do read all of the comments there, and people do contact us and ask us those questions. So a lot of those impromptu videos are follow-up questions where people are asking, like, could you do this, or what would be the next step after I'm ready to go ahead and deploy that?
Yeah, and we have limited time as well, right? Like we've got an hour a week on the channel on AWS Twitch, so we kind of use that space to complete anything that we might not have been able to do, or as Paul mentioned, we want to show off. I've just shared the link for everyone if anyone wants to check it out.
Yeah, we finally hit 100 subscribers, so now we've got our own custom URL, which is really nice. So we appreciate the subscribers there. But just for anybody in the audience, like where is everybody from today? Like I can see there's a number of different people across the different channels that we push to. So, for anybody that is new to the stream, Matt and I are in Melbourne in Australia. And, our gimmick for the show is devs in the shed. So sometimes it's some hands-on work that we're doing with electronics or taking AWS and cloud services to just not to the web browser, but taking it a little bit further than that. And so, that's our whole idea of devs in the shed. Oh, Sumit's here now. So I'll bring, yep. Hey, Sumit.
Hey, guys. How y'all doing?
Yeah, good.
Pretty
Hey,
good.
Paul. Hey, Matt.
Nice shed. Hey.
You like my shed?
Yeah, we do. We like the extra effort you
It's actually, what have I got here?
We like the extra effort.
It's freezing in my shed at the moment.
Well, my shed was quite warm. I had the door open, but it's turned a little bit and it's a bit cooler now. So, yeah, Matt and I sort of just gave a bit of a brief intro about yourself as an identity and Cognito SME at AWS as well. But maybe you can just give a quick introduction to yourself, and then we'll kick off with what we thought was interesting this week. And maybe we'll start off with you, Sumit.
Yeah. So I'm a solution architect. I actually work alongside Paul in the enterprise team here in Melbourne. I've been in AWS now for 5 years. I've been around a while. I started off actually as a technical account manager. So in Matt's org before coming across to the SA side. But yeah, I've been in the security. We call it within AWS. We call it the technical feedback community, or area of depth. So I've been involved with the security side of things for the last probably 2-3 years. And then recently just diving a bit deeper into the Cognito side, the identity side, which I'm looking forward to sharing. In terms of what's new, actually I had a quick chat with Paul this morning. I think one to call out would be around Connect and Lex. So Lex, I'm not sure if you are all aware, but so Connect is our Amazon Connect is our call center service in the cloud solution. So, if you think about building call centers, previously you'd have to acquire this hardware, complex hardware, and set up. But with Connect, it's really just 5 easy steps through the console. We manage all the backend stuff. You can get a phone number effectively just through a drop-down box, or you can bring a phone number across, and within minutes actually have a fully functional call center available. And the great thing about having a call center on AWS is you can tie it back with the other AWS services, right? So Lex is our like a chatbot type service. Like you can do conversational chatbots through that, all powered through ML. And if you haven't checked out the Lex console, maybe it's worthwhile doing that later on. But it's really easy to create a chatbot through that interface. I don't know if in any of your past sessions you've actually ever covered Lex, Paul, Matt.
No,
we haven't. But we do have one upcoming that is around Lex, and it's quite fun because it's interacting with another partner solution, and it should be. I don't want to spoil it, but it should be pretty fun and interesting. It's actually someone else that is on our team, Sumit, so that they want to come on and talk about it.
Yeah.
But I know the Connect thing is really fun, and you can set it up to do specific things with Lambda. And about 18 months ago, when I accepted my role at AWS, like obviously I was very excited about coming on board. And one of my really good friends, Colin, he knew about that, and he built a little Lex thing, Connect thing, and he made me like call this number. And when I went through, and it was like, he automated this solution that congratulated me for my role, but he did that as part of like learning about Connect, and it was quite fun, and it was like incredibly cheap and really fast to roll out, exactly like you said.
Yeah, and I actually had a contact center background too. I'll let you go, Sumit.
No, I was just going to say, so actually back in 2018, I think Connect was relatively new at the time, but I was involved with security at that time as well. And we did this voice-enabled security session at Sydney Summit. But for that, I actually created like a small demo around outbound calls. So with Connect, you can also do outbound calls, so someone calls you. So we tied that back to a security event, right? So something like, now you got Guard Duty and Security Hub, so these are AWS security services. But if a security breach, for example, happens, or an event happens, you want to be notified right away. So we did a small demo around that and a live demo with Connect. So it was easily stitched together through a Lambda function from connecting through a CloudWatch event. So yeah, it's endless opportunities and use cases you can do around that as well. Matt, go for it.
Yeah.
I think you were going to share something.
No, I was just going to say, like, like I had a bit of a background in some of the other telco providers, and you'd end up getting large licensing fees, and you don't get the flexibility that you get with Connect. So one of the things that kind of revolutionized the market before I joined AWS was the fact that you could kind of like have your own custom logic through Lambda for anything that you wanted to do in Connect, and that allowed the contact center platforms to do some pretty amazing things. But the other side of it was the contact centers are always growing. They're always overwhelmed. They're always understaffed as well because customer base is growing and they're an expense. And so like I spent a lot of my time back in the day kind of helping people build chatbots to embed into like the IVR system on the contact center or embed into a website. The idea was some of the simpler questions they could alleviate from the contact center asking. But when someone showed negative sentiment, got emotional, said something inappropriate, whatever it was, they were getting frustrated, you could bring in a contact center agent to even assist with those simpler questions. But we also had enough of a view to, as soon as we detected that it was going to be an inaccurate response or a failure, we would funnel people into Connect, for example, from Lex without Lex actually giving a response. And that way it was more of a seamless conversation. So I really like this space, and it's really good to see Lex version 2 support within Connect because Lex v2's got a lot more flexibility than Lex v1. So Lex v1, we always recommended you break out to have multiple chatbots based on like, this is a sales use case, this is a service use case, because like discussing a home loan, you could trip the sales or service use cases. So the idea was like you create defined ones and then work out where the person was on the website or where they were in the phone queue. to determine like whether it was a sales or a service inquiry, and therefore the chatbot could be a bit more useful. In Lex v2, we kind of aggregate all the chatbots into one, and then we've got a lot more clever logic to determine what use case is appropriate, and then pass them to the right component of the chatbot you've made. So it's really cool.
Yeah, I've done a few labs before. I mean, I'm interested in whether anyone in the audience has been along to any sessions anywhere and worked through some of the labs, or whether they're using Connect as well. So it'd be interesting to have some feedback around that. Yeah, I'll kick off with there's a couple of things that I'll discuss this week that I thought was interesting in that came out. One of the first is around Deep Racer. So where is it? Fully customizable action space is now available within Deep Racer. So for anybody that's not aware or hasn't seen what Deep Racer is, I'll quickly do a brief intro into this. Now, I became interested in Deep Racer basically when it first came out. I was fortunate enough to be at reInvent when it was announced, and it is gamification of machine learning. And so AWS has built up this series of stitched together behind the scenes AWS services that enable you to train a model that enables a car to autonomously drive around a specific track. And it's grown like quite a large cult following. There are competitions, there are in-person competitions. I was lucky enough to run one of these in-person events in CodeGuru, a year and a half ago or so. And it was a lot of fun. A lot of people came along. There were prizes. We got to, get fit running around, chasing the vehicle around the track. But for anybody that hasn't seen or has had some experience with Deep Racer, they know that when you are defining your model, and I won't go into it too deep, but when you're defining like a reinforced model and with machine learning, you have this thing called an action space. And the action space is the available options that the model has when it's going and exploring the virtual environment. And in this instance, the virtual environment is a racetrack, and the actions that the car can take within that racetrack to learn about its environment is it can go fast or slow, go forwards at a certain speed, but it can also turn left and right. And previously, that was it was quite rigid. The definition of your action space was quite rigid. So you could turn left 15 degrees, left 30 degrees, or go straight. So there wasn't much variation in the angles that you could go ahead and pick. And same as the speed. So you could, setting the speeds that you could do was no way near as fluid and optionally as you would like to go ahead and set those. So you had to pick predefined options for speed. So they've gone ahead and changed that in the console now and given you access to be able to set the maximum steering angle if you want to. So in the past, this might have been a maximum of, it was a maximum of 30, but you wouldn't have so much option to say, I don't really need a 30-degree hard left turn on this specific track. I really only need, a 24 degrees maximum turn. You could go ahead and configure this and change this yourself, because all these settings are pushed into S3 as a JSON file that mimics the action space. But it was a lot of work and it was cumbersome. So this brings this back to the console. It enables anybody that's just becoming familiar with the service or that doesn't really have the time to go into picking apart what the service is doing under the hood, but be able to be competitive within the race. Now, definitely have a look at this if you're interested. I'm pretty sure at the moment it's about 10 hours worth of free training. And that training can be quite a lot of fun. There are prizes up for grabs, including reInvent tickets and actual Deep Racer vehicles. So there's an actual vehicle. So you train within a virtual environment. Once the model's been built, you put in an actual little car, and the car can drive around the track. So I thought that was something that was worth calling out. The other one that I think that both Matt and myself are interested in is AWS has added Python 3.9 support within Lambda. And so you might have already picked up that Matt and I have become quite the fan of Python. We think it's a fun language. It's easy to get your head around. There's massive growth within the industry around it, very well supported in data and analytics. And even when we were building that game platform, we used Pygame, so Python, to do that. So seeing Lambda support Python 3.9 is something that I'm really pleased to see. And it ties in well with the idea of building serverless applications, because one of the greatest things about all Python releases is, and Matt can potentially bring this up and talk about it as well, is that there are performance enhancements. So this is not just additional language features that are being put in, but there are also performance enhancements that come out in the language. So if you are building your applications that are deployed into Lambda, and Lambda is built per millisecond, even just a 2% performance enhancement across Python, you could potentially end up seeing a 2% cost reduction because it just takes less time to execute. So I think that it's really we need to be conscious about the languages that we're using and the performance of those languages, especially when we're thinking about a serverless environment. So yeah, I'm quite pleased to see that be released, and we'll probably go ahead and at some point maybe reprofile application that we did last week and see whether we see some obvious differences in the performance application. I know that was quite it wasn't doing anything too intensive, but we'll see where we can see some of those changes if we were to profile it again with Locust and put it through CodeGuru and so forth. So I think
I was going to say, we've done a lot of JavaScript. We have got backgrounds in .NET and Objective-C and all these types of languages, and all of them have their benefits. But the thing that has kind of brought me back to Python lately is just the simplicity. But it is a little bit slower, and so this is kind of why I was really excited in this particular update. When Aaron and Paul and myself were making a game a couple of weeks ago, you can see that on the YouTube that we pasted the link up above. We realized that Python 3.9 was actually significantly faster than 3.8. And so this is really good to see in Lambda support. And the reason was that in 3.8, they made optimizations to the vector calls, the vector call protocol. And then basically in 3.9, they then use that in the Python built-in libraries. So range, tuple, set, frozen set, list, and dictionaries. And so that massively sped up execution of a game type environment where you're using a lot of mathematics to calculate vectors and render things, etc. But the other thing that they did was they did improve parsing of Python source code using CPython runtime as well. So I'll post a link to a particular article that talks about it. But if anyone's working on Python, definitely take a look at 3.9. And I know that the big thing in the community for Python over the next 12 to 24 months is really by Python 3.11 and 3.12 when those get released, because 3.10's only just dropped or is in beta, I can't remember. But they're trying to make it a significantly faster language as well, which will help machine learning use cases and a bunch of other things too. So I'll stop geeking out about Python, but I'll give everyone the list. It's what I just mentioned before.
I think Gek asked a good question. I think we'll take that down and talk about it another time. Just because that's a subject on its own. We'll end up talking about it for a long time. So we'll take that, and maybe we'll do a future episode around that. And maybe that's something that we could potentially bring Gek Dev on. I know Andre, and he's worked in both languages, so maybe it's worth having something like that in a future episode.
To be honest, we could probably answer that in 1 minute, right, or 30 seconds. But basically, it's going to be, it depends. So some things Python does better than JavaScript, and some things JavaScript does better than Python. Overall, a lot of the benchmarks show that JavaScript is quite a bit faster, especially with the async capabilities, which Python kind of has, but it's kind of been lacking because things are kind of tied to the GIL a lot of the time, unless you use multiprocessing. But depends on the use case. But yeah, we could speak for that on another time.
I was just going to quickly say, Matt and I ran a big session last week, and we sort of roughly we asked the audience just give us some feedback on what language you like the most, and it was overwhelmingly Python. So it'd be interesting from the audience today. Go ahead and post in the chat what's your favorite language at the moment. We won't do anything comprehensive around it, but we'll just get a general feel of what people are comfortable with at the moment, if they do have a specific preference. So go ahead and post that in, and we'll think about that. But I think now we're up to yourself, Matt. Which one were you going to talk about today?
Let me have a look. We can talk about, let's talk about Amplify hosting.
Yep.
So Amplify came out about a month ago for support for Next.js version 9, when it came specifically to deploying using the Amplify hosting feature. So that basically delivers an Amplify application on S3 and CloudFront. So there were some major changes in Next.js 11. So we've had to kind of adopt like how we handle that integration. And so it's nice to see that we now have full support for Next.js version 11. For people that aren't too familiar with Next.js, it's basically like React mixed with Express. And so it does server-side rendering of applications, which means that you get really good performance on like mobile devices and the likes, because usually you download all the JavaScript code onto the device, and then the device handles the rendering. That can take some time when you're on very slow internet and your mobile device isn't really that powerful compared to your computer. A lot of people with older mobile devices might have that issue. And so Next.js is good for that. But it was also good from a control point of view as well. If there were things that you didn't really want to have in the front end and you want to handle on the back end, Next.js kind of allows you to still have that handled within your front end applicational logic through Next. We could get into a philosophical debate as to whether that's good or not, but that's another cool benefit of Next.js as well. Now, what were the other ones that we've got there? I think the other one that I was going to talk about very quickly was App Runner. Yeah, So we've covered AWS App Runner in the past. It's a really quick to get started containerized environment. It uses ECS under the hood for containers. I think this is really, like, it's going to expand over time, right? Like, we're still waiting for features like tying into databases and tying into other things that you might have locally in your VPC. But as App Runner actually expands, I think it's going to be a really good use case for people to use within UAT environments or dev environments where they just want a quick container set up, spun up, talking to a centralized database. That container's been tested, the developer's done what he needs or she needs to do with it, then they can destroy that container again. And I think App Runner just makes it so quick to have that facility there for developers within small teams. I'm a really big advocate for it. So it's nice to see it's getting tied into AWS Toolkit for Visual Studio Code as well. Now, there was one other one, wasn't there, in the list?
There was one other one that was just some changes to CodeGuru profile with extended visualizations. So we did touch on CodeGuru. I mean, we did a session last week on CodeGuru, but there's some additional visualizations. And even last week, people were asking about, you know, what's the roadmap look like, what's coming out. And as we sort of mentioned, this is a service that is, you know, it's fairly new, and we're seeing announcements constantly being rolled out across the platform. So I just thought I'd call it out. We won't go into that in depth because, you know, we're fair way in today, and I think somebody's really like, you know, anxious to kick off. But yeah, just to call out that, like, again, we've seen another release. Like, so, you know, in the last, you know, 2 months, we've seen like 3 releases come out with CodeGuru. So I think it's something you should keep your eye on. If you're, you know, considering it, give it a go, have a look at it. There is a free trial of it, of the service. But also we're seeing continual improvements come out.
The other feature that did come out for CodeGuru this week was profiler support for Python as well. So that's really cool to see as well.
Yep. So yeah. All right. I think at this point we'll bring on Sumit, and he can go ahead and kick off. I'm not sure if your screen share is ready. Are you ready at the moment to kick off, or do you want to just do an introduction of chatting first? Well, I think Sumit's got a bit of lag here.
Yeah, I think he does. It might have been the screen shares overwhelmed the laptop.
Should we do that?
Yes, Sumit, maybe it might be easier if you can get a little closer to your router.
Hey, Kate. I think I dropped out.
Hey, it's improved.
We can see you now. You've come good. You've come good.
Yeah. Okay. You on the screen?
Yep,
we'll pop up. Yep, done. It's just loading. Just waiting for it to appear. This is why I have like a very long Ethernet cable that I manually run from the house to the shed sometimes.
Yeah. If it's going to be too slow, I might just pop back in closer to the router.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Maybe let's try and do that.
Let me do that.
We'll see what's going on there. We'll have a quick glance of your backyard as you run back inside.
Back in 30 seconds.
By the way, while we're waiting, has anyone used Cognito? So Sumit is our SME on Cognito, so he's definitely one to pump some questions to today. I can see Line has used it once. It's excellent to see.
Yeah,
I've used it for a number as well. Yeah, you go, Paul.
Yeah, I've used it for a couple of different applications. I have my own personal link shortener that I use, and all the back end of that is using Cognito to make sure that only I have access to be able to administer and add the links. But I've done a number of different workshops on it, and you know, it satisfies a lot of use cases, and it can be like quite easy to go ahead and use. So let's see now if we can get your screen up, Sumit.
I think just stop the screen share and then re-add it again, and then I think that will fix the issues that we're seeing. Yeah.
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Yep.
Yeah, there we go. Oh, look, it's 1990s internet.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I want to start off with. I did ask Paul earlier whether it was permissible to actually get a PowerPoint deck up, but I've only got 2 slides, so I promise I won't stick on this for too long. But I wanted to start off by talking about why. I wanted to actually start off by talking about some of the identity standards, right? Because if you go into Cognito, there's terms like OAuth and OIDC and scopes and flows and all of that sort of stuff, which if I go straight into talking about that, it wouldn't make sense for a lot of people. So I guess I wanted to kind of set the scene and explain what those concepts mean. So in the early 2000s, this is pre-iPhone days. Here's an example of the Yelp website. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with Yelp. But effectively, you can do reviews on there as well. And Yelp would like you to obviously invite your friends to join Yelp as well, right? And they still have that functionality. But back in the early 2000s, what they used to do was, and this is very common across multiple social sort of websites such as Yelp, which was that they would get you to enter your email address and password. So, you know, if you had a Yahoo email address and password to get contacts from, you would be entering your Yahoo email and password, sharing that with Yelp. Yelp would then reach out to Yahoo and grab those contacts that you're after, and then send your friends an email to say, hey, come join Yelp, I'm on here already. Right. So as you can imagine, very unsecure.
I would just say the level of trust must be high.
Yeah, exactly. The level of trust was through the roof, as you can imagine. And it was shocking that back then too, in fact, because who knew what Yelp was going to be doing with your email address, or what would happen with those credentials that you were sharing with them, right? So fast forward to now, obviously there's that is no longer the case. So in fact, I've got a small screenshot in here. I probably should have actually gone into the Yelp website. In fact, what I'll do is I'll actually do that. I'll just share my entire screen.
Yeah. And so by the way, while you're doing that, I liked Andre's comment. Yeah, identity pools for Cognito is excellent. I did have someone talk to me this morning about using SDS tokens with Cognito to get temporary console access, which was interesting too. Okay, your screen's up.
Okay. So this is Yelp now. So, I'm just logged in your email contacts, and you don't have to share your credentials with Yelp anymore, right? So if you just choose Gmail, for instance, it actually will pop up with the screen for to sign you into Gmail, and looks like I've clicked to sign that in. So that's fine. So let me explain what the concept of OAuth is. I'll just make this a bit bigger. So OAuth is an identity standard that came about to fix this particular problem, which was delegated authorization, right? So your client being Yelp wanting access to to context from your resource server for you to be then for Yelp to then be able to send emails to. So delegating authorization to those email contexts. So the way it works now is, as you saw on my screen when I went into Yelp and then hit Gmail, right? It takes you to the authorization server, that being your IDP provider, or in our case, Yahoo. And you see that it has a redirect URI that's actually passed along to Yahoo. And you also have a scope, this thing called a scope, which is Yelp telling Yahoo that I'm only interested in context. And there's a scope for profile, which is for them to create to Yelp, to match it back to Yelp, okay, to your Yelp account. And once you sign in, then the next step is requesting consent from the resource owner. Okay, the resource owner is you. Okay, so that's you saying, I agree for Yahoo to share my contacts back to Yelp. So when you consent, then it goes back to that callback URI with an authorization code. And that authorization code is actually sent in the actual URL itself. And I'll show you that in a bit. But that's effectively sent through the browser, right? So that's visible to you. And what we do with that authorization code is Yelp actually will use that to get the access token. That's the token that will let them get access to your contacts effectively, right? And with those access tokens, they will then contact the resource server. And the resource server is different from an authorization server in that the resource server is the actual API that you're trying to access. So that's the context.yahoo.api, right? So you'll send the access tokens to them. Yahoo will then send you back those access to send you back those contexts.
I know that I know the very first piece that you showed was like providing that username and password, and even some of the some financial money management services still do that at the moment, and like log into your account and share passwords. And it's a bit scary thinking about how much you're providing to somebody else.
That's right. Yeah. There's still banking organizations in the US who still haven't caught up with Oauth. We're talking about Oauth that came out in 2006-7 period. And they still ask if you have it, like, say, accountancy website, they will be asking you to enter your bank credentials. That's just unimaginable, the level of trust that you're giving there. And just to, I guess, cap off this slide, and then we'll get out of this deck. There's a thing called front channel and back channel. And front channel is anything that's shared via the URL, right? So it's just like a query string in the URL itself. So you can imagine that is where you don't want to share anything secure, or so for example, that access token is actually not sent from the callback from the Yelp website back to the authorization server, as you can see in here. It's actually sent over back channel as opposed to front channel. So that's to prevent any man-in-the-middle attacks, any of the security breaches that could potentially happen as part of that. And the other part of the back channel is also where you're accessing the context of Yahoo API, and that's done as a post. So I hope that gives a bit of an overview of and this is OAuth 2.0 authorization flow, okay, authorization code flow. That's what it's known as, and this is the most common flow that is used today. There's an additional level of security that's covered, which is called PKCE, PKCE, right, which provides a bit more security around that authorization code. It effectively does a hash on it to secure more so, and then allows you to also do a verification to again prevent sort of like CSRF, man in the middle type attacks. So that's OAuth. Now, what I can also show you, and I won't spend too much time on this, but if you go to oauth.com playground, or you just search in Google for Oauth Playground, you can actually see this in action. So, we talked about, actually, I'll just go back. We talked about the authorization code flow. That's the one you saw. And then PKCE, which is kind of augments this particular flow. So these are the two most common flows that are used for any of the sort of delegated authorization type use cases that you see there. Implicit is another one, and it's worth calling out with implicit. The only difference between implicit and the others is implicit doesn't use a back channel. It uses front channel for everything. So even that access token, right? It uses the front channel to send that back. And I'll show you in the console when we jump into it what that looks like. So as you can imagine, not as secure, and we don't recommend you use it unless your application doesn't support back channel for some reason.
And a good example of that might be like a front end JavaScript application, right? It's all fully run within the client of your browser, and you don't have access to server side components.
That's right. Yeah, if you don't have the server side of things, then implicit is typically the flow that you normally would go for. Now, we talked about authorization, but there's authentication as well. And OAuth 2 addresses the delegated authorization problem, but it doesn't fix the problem around authentication. So that's where OpenID Connect comes in. So OpenID Connect is actually built on top of OAuth 2. I hope you're all keeping up with me. I know there's a lot of concepts we're talking about here. But the only difference with OpenID Connect is it adds an ID profile. So you can pass attributes such as your name, your address, details that you may want to use for authenticating, right? So that's what OIDC does, and in our solution that we run through in the lab is going to be based around that. And device code is the one that's used in your television sets. So if you for example, go in a television set and try to add, I don't know, Amazon Prime, for example, and it asks for you to authenticate, it'll pop up a code, and then you'll have to go on your phone and go to the Amazon Prime auth page, and they'll add that code in. That's device code flow. So it's for very specific use cases, such as those television sets, Alexa devices, that sort of thing. Just conscious of time, what I'll do is I'll just run through a quick lab, which will show you.
It might be a good idea, Sumit, just to zoom in a little bit on the code side, especially. Yep.
Sure. Just zoom in a bit. Is that better?
Great. Yep, it's great.
Okay. So what we'll be doing is, this is a lab that we've created. Actually, it's not public facing yet, so it's password protected, but we will be looking to make this public soon. So you'll be able to get your hands dirty and learn about these Cognito concepts. But I'll start off with the Cognito in the management console, right? So let's kind of drag this across here. So if you just go into Cognito and demonstrate what it actually offers, there's two parts to Cognito. There's the user pools and identity pools, and I think there was someone in the comments mentioned that they've used identity pools. So with user pools, and you can kind of read here what it says, but effectively it allows you to create a directory for your users. So you could actually sign up users and manage it through user pools, and they can use that to sign in, sign out. You can also do federation through user pools. You can have your custom OIDC providers, IDPs, or LinkedIn. And user pools is probably what you'll using more so of, unless you have a requirement to access AWS services which don't natively support Cognito, right? So apart from API Gateway, Elasticsearch, I think it's AppSync, and Application Load Balancer.
Yep, those are the four. Yeah.
Yeah, the other services. So if you want to be accessing S3, for example, you will need temporary credentials, right? And for that, that's where identity pools comes in. So effectively, it leans on SDS to then provide those temporary credentials for you to then access those, whatever you got, an S3 bucket or DynamoDB or whatever else it is.
So maybe let's just quickly recap that, because it's a lot to take on for people that are new. So the identity pool lets you log in. So that's your directory of users that you've logged in. And so you can authenticate against that. And when you have identity
that's user pool.
No, it's user pool.
Sorry, I
user
meant to
pool.
say that. Yep, user pool. And the identity pool says that now that I've logged in, as part of the configuration here, I need those people that have logged in to have access to, like you said, push images into Rekognition to determine whether or not they were, safe for work or something, for argument's sake. And you need short-term credentials. The identity pools is the way you would configure the mapping between those users and those credentials that are required to access that specific AWS service.
Correct. Yeah, it actually maps. Sorry, go for it. No, I was
just going to say, one of the things that like people that are like looking at Cognito and looking at like cloud generally have as a question I've seen is like, how does RBAC fit into the equation? Like, how do I have like resource-based access to like particular elements, particular database, database tables of things relating to a particular user or relationships between users? How do I expose that information safely with Cognito? And it does get confusing when you think of identity pools versus user pools. So I was going to say, like, when you want users to access like a backend, like let's say you're doing like a SQL query and that data is supposed to be exposed to that user, you'd be using the user pool side of that to do the authorization and I'm going mind blank on the wording, but if you wanted to like call a particular service, like, and you wanted to talk to a resource as a whole, or controlled access to a particular resource, you'd use identity pools. So that's something that I do see like in a lot of the conversations I have with customers, like a trick when people are like, how do I really use Cognito and cloud effectively, and how does RBAC come into play? Because that's most people are building like these free tier apps, and they'll call their database connector on the back end, and they're like, how does this all fit in? I don't know if you've got an opinion on that, Summit, as well, but that's a common query, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and a lot of customers ask, which one should I use? I think actually depending on what your use case is, right? So if you're storing your users signing up to user pools, if you're using it as essentially as your user directory, so when they sign in, they'll be signing in through user pools. But then if they need access to some document that's hosted out of S3 in an S3 bucket, then identity pools comes in. But you may not always have to use user pools as well. Like if you just want to have guest access, right? So we have an unauthenticated option as well. And you want to tie it back to something that's running in an AWS service that requires temporary credentials, then yeah, you only need identity pools. So maybe the labs that I'll go through in a bit will probably clarify that.
Yeah.
So just conscious of time, I'm sure we probably will run short of time. But what I've done, I'll just quickly kind of touch on the user pools before we move on.
Maybe just zoom that screen in a little bit, Sumit, as well.
Yeah, sorry. Okay.
Yeah, that's good.
That's better. Yep. So this is a user pool I created, and actually maybe it's easier if I just walk through the steps. So let's just go through the steps here. So the first questions asked is in terms of your username. So you can obviously customize what your usernames are allowed to do. So sign in with a verified email address or verified phone number, etc., etc. So you can check that options. What attributes you'd like to set, right? To create that profile. And it's worth noting that if you're creating a user pool, you need to make sure that you get this right from the outset, because you can't go back in and change this. So that's in respect to the attributes. That is as it is currently, unless the team actually come out with a feature that changes that. So if you're creating a user pool, make sure you get your attributes right. Otherwise, you'd have to create a new user pool, and then you'll have to migrate users across.
MFA is something that you have to determine up front as well, like require MFA can only be done on user pool creation. Whereas if you have it as users can optionally use MFA, you can change between no MFA and optional MFA at any time. That's one of the things I've spotted in Cognito as well. So if you want to require MFA, there's a couple of ways to do it. You can either migrate user pools, or you can enforce MFA on your users through like a custom view that you've made in your app.
Yep. So there you go.
Yeah.
That's the option for enabling MFA. And then recovering how you want to recover. So there's this customization that you can do in terms of how your users interact with Cognito. Email addresses for setting notifications, that sort of stuff. You can tie it back to SES. You can customize your email verification messages. Same with the invitation messages as well. Tags. Devices is a good one to know about. So if you want to remember user devices, and this can prevent like middle of demand attacks. So if you set, for example, with always, it will create it'll match it against the device that you logged in through, so match it through your browser and the device you were on. And that way you can say it could be only allowed through the air. And obviously you can suppress MFA if you've got that for in there.
That's good for game clients,
yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Now, probably for the developers here, I think app clients is probably going to be where you try to figure out how you want that experience for your mobile or your web app to be. And it's worth noting that you're not just limited to a single app client. You can create actually multiple app clients. So traditionally, I would suggest you have an app client, say for your mobile device, and then another one for your web, because you can set the different expiration dates and times. So earlier we had spoken about the access token, right? And I also, I guess I referred to the ID token for OIDC, which is where you can get users to add their attributes in. But there's also a thing called refresh token. So refresh token is where it uses, it gets the user to, it effectively will go through and get a renewed access token. So you will say, hey, refresh token should be, your refresh token, you can set for expiration to be up to these number of days, but you may choose it to be a whole day, for example. And then within that day, if the access token expires, say with every I don't know, you can set it as low as 5 minutes, but you can also set it up to a day. Let's say you set it every 5 minutes, the refresh token will make sure to go and renew that for that 5 minutes for that entire day before it actually expires completely. The auth flows configure. I'll skip this because I don't want to confuse the users, but there's other flows available as well, which you can leave the default settings in here, and we can kind of come back to this maybe at a later date. Security configuration, so prevent user existing errors. Yeah. Enable token revocation. This was a new feature, just came out probably in the last month or two. So yeah, a feature to add new claims to access and ID tokens. And claims are effectively attributes.
Yeah. So that's actually really cool, right? Because it means if you've got a user that's gone rogue and they're hooked into identity pool and accessing an AWS resource, like talking to AppSync and specific information that's being fed through an AppSync, you can kind of like pull the gun on them, devalidate the current token that they've got, disable their account, and have that all happen in real time, right? Yeah.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah. And a lot of customers choose Cognito, similar to all other AWS services because the integration with the wider ecosystem, right? But there's a functionality within Cognito which calls triggers, right? And you can see in here, you can tie it back to a Lambda function. So pre-sign-up, pre-auth, post-auth. There's one around pre-token generation.
Some of that can be really useful when you're migrating, right? Like some of those triggers and hooks to say, I'm migrating.
Yeah. That's right. There's actually a trigger for user migration itself as well. In the lab, if we get time, there's an example around using pre-token generation, but I'll just share something very, very simple one, right? Like pre-auth. You could tie it back to a Lambda function, which all it does is it writes to the console logs. And what would happen, or even for post-auth, right? And that way, what you could do is go into your CloudWatch dashboard and monitor those Lambda functions that are called over a period of time. Because now you suddenly have a visualization of what a user is doing pre-auth or post-auth. And you can extract those data points. So that's the simplest of Lambda functions, which is just simply writing to the console. So that's one thing we suggest you do, especially when you, I guess, building up your solution and you're trying to understand what your user patterns are. Use your triggers to do that. In the solution, in the demo, in the lab, I don't know if we'll get time, but what we're doing is we're doing a pre-token generation. And what that does is it customizes the claims in the token itself. So we're changing, depending on where the user comes from, we're adding or changing the claim that's in that token. And based on that claim, we're matching it against an IAM policy to say whether this user will have access to this particular document sitting in S3 bucket or not. So, again, opportunity is endless, right? You can do multiple different things with triggers. Matt and Paul, have you guys seen any others around this that was worth
I've seen
sharing?
people do like voice authentication or visual identification like as a secondary step on this. I've also seen like game companies use it as like we're also going to compare like your IP address and other details that we're getting as part of your pre-sign up authentication to make sure that you're not part of some botnet or banned player list. So I've seen like those scenarios before as well. The Lambda stuff is awesome because you got flexibility, but my other favorite feature is adaptive auth, right? Like when it comes to controlling like whether there's risk associated. Like if I'm Matt and I'm always logging in from Melbourne and then suddenly I log in from Ireland, that's unusual, and I can kind of like note that as high risk and have a rule set play out as well, to say make him re-authenticate with MFA just to really make sure Matt's who he says he is this time, because he's not usually in Ireland, especially like 5 minutes after he just logged out of Melbourne.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And there's a feature within Cognito called advanced security, and that will actually catch that sort of anomalous activity up. It's not turned on by default. So if I was to show you what that looks like, it's in here.
Adaptive auth, here it is.
Do you want to enable? Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can do audit only as well, where you just want to be capturing additional log type, what the users are doing, how they're logging in, that sort of stuff. But yeah, out of the box, it's worth considering turning this on, especially if you've got sensitive data behind your application.
So I know we're probably not going to have time for the lab, but what are some of the ways that people can tie in their front ends very simply to Cognito, maybe?
Yeah. So the easiest way is to leverage Amplify. I don't know, Matt and Paul, have you guys gone through an Amplify session previously?
That's how I know Cognito.
We've never demonstrated or touched Amplify on the show, but we touch and go through Amplify quite a lot. So I wrongly said that Apple was added like last week, but what I meant to say was like Amplify added support for Apple last week. We spoke about it on the
within their UI components for Cognito.
But we use Amplify quite a bit, and so even when I was talking about that link shortener thing that I've got, like I used Amplify to go ahead and set that up. But you're right. The easiest way is to use Amplify to go ahead and set that up.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you're, no, I was going to say like Chalice has support for Cognito out of the box. You've also got like UI components in Cognito for applications as well that you can leverage. I think there's a Java example. I've seen .NET examples as well. So you're not just stuck to using Amplify, but you've got a range of things to pick from. I do like the fact that like React is quite common, and so I do like the fact that Amplify ties in very quickly to JavaScript-based apps.
Yeah, it's really handy when you're using the Amplify UI libraries and support, where you basically say, here's my app, and anything within this certain boundary requires authentication, and it handles all of that for you. Building out an SPA and making sure that specific routes and internal sections of that application are protected and require authentication, then handling the redirect and bringing you back to that point where you were, and making sure all of that is handled. That's a lot of work that's involved in doing that. And Amplify handles that really, really well, as well as converting, if you need, into like those short-term credentials where you need access to back-end services.
Yeah, and that's kind of where maybe I didn't clarify, because I knew we were racing on time and as I trip on my chair. But like on that, like user pools versus identity pools side of the equation, right? Like you can use identity pools and have really fine-grained access against like API gateway or AppSync. And you can access like backend, results from a database with that fine-grained auth as well, using identity pools and Cognito. But a lot of the customers that I work with, they kind of start with Amplify. They just add an auth, and all that they're doing is like, is this user logged in? Have they got a valid token? And then they have like their RBAC logic to like RDS or their on-premise database or whatever it is that they've built in the past. And they have all that logic like within their application level as well. And they just kind of use Cognito for that. Let's authenticate the user, make sure there's a valid token, and then display what we should have within that authenticated area. So that's what I was trying to get to before. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's worth calling out with Amplify. Obviously, if you use a CLI, it kind of gives you this wizardy way of adding auth. But if you need a bit more functionality, you can also use the Amplify auth library itself, right? So, and actually, I would recommend, if you do need that level of customization, the Amplify auth library is probably my preference. We also have the previous to Amplify coming on board, there was the Identity SDK, and there still is. So, and if the Amplify auth library is not the right fit, then Identity SDK is what you'd fall back to. But I'd say, yeah, as Matt said, right, like you start off with just simply adding auth through Amplify, and then figuring out what customizations you need, and then you can always backtrack from that.
Yeah,
and it's worth checking out the documentation in here.
That's right, and I did forget to call out Flutter and Swift and like native Android support as well, right? So it's not
React
just
Native.
JavaScript,
Exactly.
React Native, yeah.
We don't have time anymore on the labs, but what I was going to show you where we actually use the Identity SDK, and maybe this could be a session for the future, but where we effectively go through and build this small sort of portal where we sign in at the user. So I don't know if the audience are familiar, but this is JS Fiddle, where you can add your HTML, JavaScript, CSS components, and then create a preview screen of what you're building out. You can add your, the resources that you pull the library names, etc. for it. And what we end up with was we actually were going to build out this solution where we sign in. We can do MFA, we call APIs, and then we also access S3 as well. But maybe for the future session, and actually by then, I'm hoping that we can make this particular lab public facing as well.
Yeah, I've done this lab, and I think it was quite a good lab, and we've run it internally for an internal enablement and training session, and it was really well received. And it takes you through those real world scenarios. Like, you never really understand until you go ahead and build and implement it yourself. So I think that running all of us through the lab in the future and providing the option for anybody who wants to follow along would be really valuable as well.
Yeah,
exactly.
Let us know in the chat though. I'd be really keen to run through the lab on another session, right? Like, I think it needs a full hour to really devote to it.
Yes.
More than keen to do that. If anyone wants to amplify as well, we can have a future session on that too. That would be fairly easy for us to arrange. Just let us know. But I'll hand back to you, maybe, Paul.
Well, yeah, I guess like thanks for Sumit for coming along and taking us through. Like it's a identity is such a big topic, and we just have so many customers coming and talking to us about Cognito and their use case and how that will work, that it does take a long time to go through, what the pieces are, how they come together, and how we can go ahead and use it. And so, we've got a comment here from a Hello Lupin. I know Hello Lupin is a real regular, but he's saying like a lab is nice, and I think it is nice. So, I think we should definitely do a future session, and you walk through it, and we'll be able to, hopefully by then, be able to provide access to everybody with, in the public with that lab, so that we can, everybody can have a go and see what it looks like, see how it works. Here's a question for you, Sumit.
Yeah, DR setup
Cognito?
And if yes. So Cognito is a regional service. So if you're looking at doing DR then outside of a region, no. So you'd have to build something around migrating your user pools, but that's not a capability at the moment. But as I said, Cognito is a regional service, and within the region you have multiple availability zones. Cognito is not tied to a particular AZ. So in effect, if you're building out a workload in a particular region, it has DR capability all set up through it. But there's a solution, there's an AWS custom solution for doing backups of your user pool, which will export out all your users. So in case someone does a misconfiguration or loses our entire database of your users, you can always bring those users back in. And I can share that actual solution if you like in the comment section.
Yeah, he says right now we keep backups of our users, and once it happens, and we have to manually trigger emails to reset their passwords.
Yeah.
So I think
it's still a problem.
Yeah, Leon Haters would like that piece. So go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and comment on this specific episode, so we know how to follow you up. So you can go ahead and reach out to us that way. And secondly, we'll go ahead and we'll post that link and that artifact onto the video that's attached to this as well.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So, Sumit, thank you so much for coming along. We look forward for you coming in the future. You went to the extra effort of wearing the flannel shirt and getting into your shed.
Don't get me started. Yeah, so just for context for everyone else, Paul actually mentioned that, we have to wear a flannel shirt for this event. So I made the extra effort of actually putting this flannel shirt on, and then realizing that, I've been stitched up. So good one. Nice one, guys. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming along, and thanks everybody for coming along today as well. As we sort of mentioned, we do our impromptu streams, but we'll be here again at the same time next week. Matt, do you remember what we had scheduled for next week?
I think, don't quote me on it, I think it was GitHub Pilot, or that might have been the week afterwards, but I'd have to double check. It's either Copilot or Greengrass. Yeah, pretty sure it's Copilot.
No, next week.
No.
You forgot, because we discussed and we went around a few times that a lot of people wanted a little bit of a textual follow along of what we're doing, just some updates, and we wanted to put a blog, so we're going to look at Lightsail. Yeah. So neither of us have actually clicked and touched Lightsail, so we wanted to do that live, and we're going to hopefully set up the blog with Lightsail and WordPress next time.
It's going to be so different, because usually when I set up a WordPress backend, I ring a guy and I tell him what I want. I give him my credit card number, and he gives me a site back in a week. That's how I used to do it back in the day, 10 years ago.
Yeah,
it's when you used to have hosting companies that look after all this for you.
Yeah, I'm hoping ours will be easier than that, but there's some features there's some features inside Lightsail that will allow us to overly architect our blog, and maybe we'll explore doing that, because I think that's always fun.
Yeah, and thanks again. I know Auth is a huge topic. I know Cognito, we're aiming to get to full OpenID Connect compatibility at some point, but we've got really good support for the basics there. I know that there's a lot of customers that we meet day to day that are still using SAML, which doesn't really work properly on mobile devices for authentication. And a lot of people, like during that SAML period as well, they home rolled their own database for authentication, right? So they're storing usernames and passwords with hashing and salt in a database. So so it's really good. Like Cognito helps you get out of that particular issue and onto more of a modern authentication authorization system.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that Cognito has some hard limits, and if you've got over 80 million users, for example, or if you've got thousands of users trying to jump on at the same time, maybe Cognito is not the right fit. But for most of the other use cases, it is a good fit, and it's very cost optimal as well compared to the competitors out there.
Other solutions.
So worth considering.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks Sumit. Thanks Matt. Thank you everybody that's come along today and engaged with us. The more engagement we have, the more fun it is for us, and we get to reflect on what the community as a whole wants to hear about. But see you all next week, same time, same place. And thanks everybody.
Thanks
Take care.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.